This time I've got some 1mm round sterling silver wire and some 1mm round bronze wire. So I'm going to do a spaghetti ring that's thinner but also has a colour contrast to it. But I'm going to start in the same way. I've got my mark. This time, because the wire is thinner, I'm going to aim pretty much where my mark is, because I don't have as much wire to, don't poke yourself in the eye doing this, to stretch out afterwards. Wrap, pulling it nice and tight, and keep going, and there we go. So as you can see, when I do that, I don't put a lot of thought into it. I'm just wrapping, and then I can tweak the shape a little bit afterwards. But the important thing is, at the minute, you want it to fit. So with the heavier gauge wire, with the 1.5mm, what we did was we filed the ends flat, and then we brought them together like a traditional solder join and just soldered it at this point. Because these are thin wires, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to tuck them into the rest of the nest with some tweezers. So again, it doesn't need to be exact, it's just about making sure that you have a point of contact. So at the minute, the bronze wire has gone in and it's sitting there nice and tight, whereas the silver one wasn't touching anything, so that means it won't solder to anything. And then same with the ones on the outside, I'm just going to tuck them. I'll move the camera so you can see better. So I've got my loose ends here. I'm going to take my pliers and I'm just going to tuck these wires in to the little nest. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. I just need to make sure that the loose ends are touching other bits of this structure, so that when I add solder to the ends, the solder will solder the ends to the rest of the ring band. Doesn't matter too much if they're poking out the other side a little bit, because you can always file that off afterwards. But that's looking alright to me, and the size is still looking good. Yeah. So that's ready to solder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flux it and put a little bit of solder where each of the wire ends is. If I use my traditional solder, my hard solder, little pallions, then I might have to do the joins on this side and then flip it over and do those as a separate solder join. But because this is thin wire, I might actually just use my solder paste and then I can do it all at the same time. So here I've got some hard solder paste and I'm just going to dab little bits on where those loose wires are. I don't use solder paste very often because it's a lot more toxic than using traditional solder. Before I heat this up, I'm going to open the shed door to get some airflow in, and I'm also going to put my little extractor on. But in saying that, it is useful for little fiddly jobs like this. It saves you having to try and balance tiny bits of solder sheet or pallions in place. And also, if I get this on my hands, I'm going to make sure I wash my hands as well. Where's that little end gone? There we go. Okay, the shed door's now open. I'm going to turn my extractor on in a second and then I'm going to solder it. Once again, I'm being very mindful about where my flame is, that no little bit of wire is getting too hot. Don't want to melt it. The thinner the wire, the easier it is to melt it. I've just taken the thin spaghetti ring out of the pickle and given it a quick scrub with a brass brush, so I haven't done any other cleanup to it. But as you can see, it's all soldered, and because of the multiple layers, it's all quite structurally secure. And this is the one that, because it's the thin wire, I wrapped it at the exact ring size that I wanted. So the marker and mandrel sits in the middle of the ring and it fits. So unlike the heavier gauge, the 1.5mm, where I purposely made it a little bit smaller because I was then going to do some hammer texturing to stretch it, this one I haven't hammered to stretch, I've just used a rawhide mallet for the shaping. So therefore, because it's the thin wire and I wasn't going to stretch it, I made it the exact size that I wanted the finished ring to be. Similar to this one, where I put the little collet setting on there, this one I'm going to solder a little bezel onto it. But if you remember, I was saying it's really important that I don't solder the bezel too far into the nest of the ring, because if I solder it and get the wire stuck to the top edge of the bezel, I'm not going to be able to push it over the curve of my stone. So the same rules with any bezel setting, but it's easy to sort of get carried away and nestle it in between a couple of wires where it sits nicely and looks nice, but actually you then get left with something you can't push over. So I've got to find the balance between having it look nice but not having it sit too low so that I can get it to keep the stone in place. So I'm going to set that up, solder it, and then I'll show you how I get on. So here's my little spaghetti ring. I've fluxed it, I've put a piece of solder on there, so a piece of Palion hard silver solder, fluxed the little setting cup, popped that on top as well, and now I'm going to solder it. So same as every other time, it's really important that I keep an eye on what's getting hot and where my flame is, because I need to get the wires and the setting cup up to temperature without melting any little bits that I don't want to. So that's the solder flown. I just want to give it a little bit more heat to make sure it's on there properly. If I see a wire getting too hot, I move my position or I pull further away. And there we go. There we go. One little bezel cup soldered in amongst the nest. Now, as you saw when I was making these, I don't think about it very much. I'm literally just doing this and going with the flow. You can pre-plan it a bit more if you want to, either by doing a mock-up with some copper or other cheap wire, silver plate wire, or even a bit of string just to judge the length. So you just need to use something that's about the same thickness as whatever material you're going to end up using. But the other thing is as well, quite often when they look messy, it's just because you're not finished yet. So feel free, don't be scared to go in and tweak the design with your pliers, with your fingers, pop it on the ring mandrel, true up the shape, give it a little tap with the rawhide mallet, whatever you need to do. And the other thing as well is, remember, things tend to look a bit messy till you give them the final shine and polish, or good sanding as well. But anyway, I've got a little bezel cup on. I'm going to stick a little amethyst in there and then set it. To set the stone, I could either use my bezel punch again, in which case I would find the one that's the right size, pop it over, give it a little tap with the hammer, or you can use traditional stone setting tools, which is what I'm going to do. So if you haven't done much bezel setting, obviously these aren't stone setting tutorials, but you could go back and look at the various stone setting tutorials from the 12 months of metal video, or you'll see loads of tutorials on YouTube and various books. But I'm just going to use my pusher to push the edge of the bezel cup over the stone, and then when that's over, I'm going to go in with my burnisher, give it a really good rub. And there we go. One spaghetti ring.